There are 10 participants on the call, including you. You are joining your conference as a participant. For a menu of available commands, press *#.
Start by sharing a little more information about yourself.
Sure. My name is Ann Murphy. I am a senior social worker at Ann and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago. I've been working in the audiology department and on the cochlear implant team at Lurie Children's Hospital for almost 7 years. And I've been at Lurie Children's Hospital for almost 10 years. So you guys as parents probably have a lot of experience and a lot of understanding and could probably give this talk just as well as I could. So I'm just kind of sharing my perspective as a social worker who's working with families when their child's initially diagnosed with hearing loss or there's any change in hearing or difficulties arise during that adjustment time or throughout, different periods in the child's development. Sometimes that can come when parents aren't feeling like they're getting enough support from extended family members, who might be watching the child during the day, or daycare providers, things like that. So brainstorming with family members how to get people to provide the support that they need. You want me to go ahead and proceed?
That would be, okay. That would be fantastic. One problem, it's not letting me pass you the ball to go forward with your slides. So if you would like to give me like a cue word, or just as soon as you get done reading on a slide, I can go to the next one for you.
Okay. I'm going to, you can stay on the first slide now and I'll tell you when to pass it.
Okay. Thank you.
So I'd like to start with a poem that you guys probably are all familiar with. It's called Welcome to Holland, if you'll just bear with me if you are familiar with it, but I kind of want to set the stage for the presentation tonight. It's by Emily Pearl Kingsley. I'm often asked to describe the experience of raising a child with a disability, to try to help people who have not shared that unique experience to understand it, to imagine how it would feel. It's like this. When you're going to have a baby, it's like planning a fabulous vacation trip to Italy. You buy a bunch of guidebooks and make your wonderful plans. The Colosseum, the Michelangelo David, the gondolas in Venice. You may learn some handy phrases in Italian too. It's all very exciting. After months of eager anticipation, the day finally arrives. You pack your bags and off you go. Several hours later, the plane lands. The stewardess comes on and says, "Welcome to Holland." Holland, you say? What do you mean Holland? I signed up for Italy. I'm supposed to be in Italy. All my life I've dreamed of going to Italy. But there's been a change in the flight plan. They've landed in Holland, and there you must stay. The important thing is that they haven't taken you to a horrible, disgusting, filthy place full of pestilence, famine, and disease. It's just a different place. So you must go out and buy new guidebooks, and you must learn a whole new language, and you'll meet a whole new group of people who you never would have met. It's just a different place. It's slower paced than Italy, less flashy than Italy, but after you've been there for a while and you catch your breath, you look around, and you begin to notice that Holland has windmills, and Holland has tulips. Holland even has Rembrandts. But everyone you know is busy coming and going from Italy, and they're all bragging about what a wonderful time they had there. And for the rest of your life, you will say, yes, that's where I was supposed to go. That's what I had planned. And the pain of that will never, ever, ever, ever go away, because the loss of that dream is a very, very significant loss. But if you spend your life mourning the fact that you didn't get to Italy, you will never be free to enjoy the very special, the very lovely things about Holland. Okay, Melissa, you can go to the next slide. So I read that because I want to kind of put into perspective. I'm sure you guys all remember the day that your children were diagnosed with hearing loss, and you can probably relate to a lot of what Emily Pearl Kingsley wrote in her poem. The feeling of crisis, of losing control, of kind of not having an understanding of what was going on, the sadness that you felt that day. Are you able to go to the next slide? Okay, well, I'll keep talking. Sorry that if the slides aren't moving. So thinking back to that day, thinking about your thoughts and your own feelings that were going on, things that were going through your head, I also feel like a lot of times when parents receive a diagnosis of hearing loss, they don't understand what's being said. It's a foreign language. Unless they've heard it before, they're familiar with hearing loss because of family members with hearing loss or friends or neighbors or coworkers that have children with hearing loss. It really is a foreign language. The important thing that I like to keep in mind also as a professional dealing with hearing loss, thank you for advancing, back a couple I think, is that not only is there sadness in that moment when the child is first diagnosed, but that sadness can often resurface throughout the child's lifetime. So when they're not meeting milestones or not developing as their typical peers might be developing, whether it's with language or with social interactions, but those are going to resurface at different times along the child's lifetime. You have to deal with the expectations, like they talked about in the poem, of what you are expecting out of your child versus the reality of what you now have with your child. Parents often have to make quick decisions about interventions and therapy. The point of early intervention, getting therapy started as soon as possible. Oftentimes parents might not truly understand what the diagnosis is and how it's going to affect them and their child. So I like to paint that picture, and I'm sure you guys can all have vivid memories of the day that your child was diagnosed with hearing loss or the day that confirmation was received. And then how did you relay that information to your family members or to your support system, to your friends, to your neighbors, whoever your support system is? Because I think when you take into account all those emotions and all the information that you were being swamped with, and then you were given the job of then having to go and relay that information to other people, is a very difficult position to have to hold. Okay, so let's talk about some of the barriers to gaining support. I think the most obvious one is distance. You know, we live in an age where family and support systems are all over the world, all over the country, and so they might not be, you know, down the street or around the corner or even in the same town. So the distance, I think the communication as well, you know, the fact that we're all on a conference call tonight with our phones, our iPads, in our cars, wherever, that, you know, we live in an age of technology where the internet's there. People might be communicating through Facebook or texting instead of phone calls or instead of, you know, visits over dinner. So how is the communication happening when you're having to tell your family members about your child's hearing loss? Is it, you know, is it over the phone? Is it in person? Taking those things in mind, because I think that can be a big barrier to extended family understanding your child's hearing loss and also understanding the extent of it and also understanding what type of support you're asking for. Taking into account also generational differences. When you think about your child's generation, you think about neighbors' generations, your own generation, your parents' generations, all these different generational differences in how we communicate differently among generations, and also what information we have available. So whereas our parents' or grandparents' generations might not be going onto the internet to learn about hearing loss, you know, teenagers and younger generations, those in our generation, might be using resources that to seek out additional information. So understanding those differences as far as how they're gaining information as well. Coping styles, which I'll kind of go into in a little bit, but understanding that everybody copes differently. For those of you in relationships, you probably know your significant other, how they deal with things when they have a bad day, when they come home from work. Are they the type that are going to yell and scream, or just kind of shut down and kind of keep to themselves? You can look at yourself and figure out how you cope when you have a bad day, when somebody makes you angry. Have to keep that in mind too when you're talking about a significant other, or spouse, or partner dealing with hearing loss of your child, and then also whether it be grandparents or aunts and uncles as well. We all know the internet has both helpful information and harmful, so making sure that the information that we're getting on the internet is accurate. I think a lot of times parents will quickly go to Google and put in hearing loss or put in the degree of hearing loss that the audiologist has told the parents that their child has, and the information that comes up might actually not be accurate or helpful to the parents or to the grandparents or whoever is Googling that information. Another barrier to gaining support is the age that the child is being diagnosed. So with our newborn hearing screening now, we're seeing a lot of families come in with their child 3, 4, 6 weeks old when we're diagnosing the child on an unsedated ABR with a significant hearing loss. At that age, you know, babies are expected to be eating, sleeping, drinking, and pooping and really not babbling or communicating. They're just really starting to smile and starting to interact. But a lot of times at that age, parents might not have concerns, especially if it's their first child. They might not see that the child's not startling or might not see that the child's not reacting to noise, and so they haven't had time to develop that concern. Whereas if there's an older child who's, you know, 18 months, 24 months, 2.5 years old, the child's not babbling, not speaking, not responding to their name, the parent has had more time to understand, okay, now I'm a little bit concerned. So understanding that as well, and from extended family members' point of view as well, how often they're seeing the child, if they don't have enough suspicions to raise concern, it can impact the support that they're going to be able to provide to the parents or family members of that child. Okay. Another point to keep in mind, too, is as the parent, you're typically the one there with your child when their diagnosis of hearing loss is delivered. And if you can think back to that day, I don't know how much you guys remembered from the information that you were given, but I know the parents that I have talked to often tell me that the only thing they remember the audiologist saying is that their child has hearing loss. And so then parents leave there and have to go give this information to grandparents or aunts and uncles or family members that are supporting them, and the parents often don't remember a lot of the information. And so that can be a barrier for grandparents or aunts and uncles or any support system to the parents because there's not a lot of information to share. The last barrier that I want to talk about is difference in learning styles. Working in a hospital, and you guys probably know when you go to the doctor now, they always do a screening beforehand. You know, how do you learn? Do you learn by listening? Do you learn by reading? Do you learn by giving a demonstration, by a showing? What's the best way that you learn? If we can understand what the learning style is of the people that we want to support us, that's going to help too. So do I need to bring Grandma and Grandpa with to an appointment so they can see what the testing looks like in the booth and what my son or daughter is missing out on so that they understand, oh, yeah, I really do need to help mom and dad get the hearing aids on the child because they are missing out on a lot? Or is it an aunt or uncle who prefers to learn through reading? Is there an article or are there brochures that I can get from the audiologist that I can then pass on to that family member to help them better understand my child's hearing loss? All right. Melissa, you can go ahead and go to the next page. So when we talk about all those barriers, too, another big barrier to gaining support is the stages of grief and loss that different members of the family might be going through. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, but you're probably mostly familiar with her stages of grief and loss. She originally used and developed this to deal, to kind of help those dealing with a terminal diagnosis, but it can be and often is also applied to many other life situations, whether, you know, I think a diagnosis of a child, whether it be hearing loss or another diagnosis or developmental delay or anything like that, can bring about these feelings. As they're listed on the screen, they're not in order. They don't have to be in order. You don't have to go through them in order. And you can also revisit them. So a lot of times parents can start off in denial, go to anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, or they can go through it in order, or they can jump back and forth. So you might be in denial about your child's hearing loss. Oftentimes I'll see parents come in and talk about, well, how they respond when dad comes home from work and he walks in and the child turns to look at the door. Often there can be anger, and then they might go back to denial again. So they can jump around. Like I said, it doesn't have to happen in any order. But I think being sensitive to not only where you are as far as how you're feeling about your child's hearing loss, and you don't have to say, oh, I'm in the anger stage, or I'm bargaining. But I think understanding maybe where your support system is, and seeing, especially being a little bit more removed from the situation, which sounds like most of the parents on the call might be a little bit more removed from that initial diagnosis. So you can think about back to the times when you were really feeling anger, when you were feeling sadness or grief about it, and then probably a point where you came to accept your child's hearing loss and decided, okay, this really sucks, but this is what I've been given, and this is what I need to work through in order to help my child do the best that they can do. Okay, so let's go ahead and move to the next one about how we cope. I think we all cope differently, obviously. Some of us do better in certain situations than others. I want you to just take a second and think about, how you cope. What are your coping strategies that you use? Like I talked about before, when you have a bad day or when you've been given bad news, what are some of the skills that you use to get through that difficult time? So just take a second and think about that. Think about how you've seen other people cope, maybe other parents cope, other family members cope with difficult situations. My favorite thing to do in my work is to see parents kind of overcome and get to that acceptance stage with their child's hearing loss. One of the biggest skills that I think a lot of parents have is resilience. They have just found this ability to overcome this and embrace their child and love their child. Oftentimes I see them face it with confidence, willingness to redefine their roles and attitudes and values. So what was important to them before can still be important to them, but how are we going to face it differently? Sense of humor is often important. I think a lot of people often turn to sense of humor when things get tough. You always have the wisecracker who's going to throw in the joke and try to make things a little easier to bear with. The ability to access services and therapies. So are there services, quality services available in your area? Is there knowledge about hearing loss? Do you have a good support person through your early intervention program or through your school system that is kind of going to guide you and mentor you through those difficult times? That goes along with the availability of support systems, and then also eventually coming to the terms of acceptance of your child's hearing loss. So thinking about how you guys cope too as parents, and then thinking about your support system. So whether that be friends or family members, but how are they coping? How do you see, your parents cope when they're given difficult information? How do you see your siblings cope, your cousins cope, your neighbors, whoever your support system is? Okay, my next slide is just a great quote that I found in a book by Featherstone, it's by Featherstone in a book by Parad. It says, acceptance, an ongoing process, involves acknowledging the handicap and its long-term significance, integrating the child and the disability into the life of the family and its members, learning to forgive one's own errors and shortcomings, and searching for meaning in loss. So I want to end with talking about how do we overcome these barriers that we talked about. How do we get our extended family members to jump on board and really support us during good times and bad? I think the biggest thing is being direct. making sure that you can ask for what you need, being assertive, which I think can be hard as parents. It can be hard to say, hey, I need support, I need help, I need someone to come over here today and help me out with the kids because I really need to focus on getting the hearing aids, on the baby for more hours during the day. So being direct and really asking for what you need. But I think the first step in that is figuring out what you need so that you can get the support and be able to ask for it. As I mentioned before, being able to ask family members to go to appointments with you. So, if Grandma and Grandpa are babysitting 3 days a week, it might make sense to bring them to an appointment so that they can better understand the hearing loss. They can better understand your child's audiogram and understand what they're missing out on if they're not wearing their amplification during the day when they're with Grandma and Grandpa. Be understanding. So a lot of the big reason I talked about differences in coping, different stages of grief and loss is because we do have to be understanding that people are going to be at different places. As I talked about in one of the earlier slides too, is that our sadness and grief is going to hit us at different times throughout our child's life when we see difficulties in school or we see maybe something that might come easier for one of our other children without hearing loss, that it's more difficult for our child with hearing loss. Or our child's not making a developmental milestone that other children their age are, that we really have to be understanding that, that sadness and grief might hit us. It might also hit our extended family members that we're looking to for support. They might be able to be strong for us when we are weak, and then when we are finally strong and able to accept and kind of move forward and embrace our child's hearing loss, they might then have a moment of weakness or kind of not feel like they have to be as strong because we've regained our strength. And then, building additional support systems. I think using different resources, whether it be in the school, in the community, using, Guide by Your Side, using Choices, using all these community supports to gain that support when our family members can't step up. So asking your neighbors for help, asking the school to, hey, let's have a breakfast once a month for parents of children with hearing loss. So being creative and then building that support system if your family can't be that support that you need them to be. That's pretty much it as far as overcoming the barriers. They're short and simple. I think it's being direct and really understanding what it is you need and then asking for it. On the next couple of slides, I listed some resources, hopefully that are familiar to you guys. The first one that's listed, I think, is a great handout I often give to parents to understand just typical development and understanding where their child is with speech and development. It's often a good pamphlet to give to family members because it's pretty easy to understand, it's easy to read, it's easy to go and say, okay, look, our child's 6 months old, and this is what they should be doing in relation to speech, and this is what they should be doing in relation to hearing, and kind of understanding if there's a gap there. See if there's any other. The last one, on the second slide, the last one, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, this is a new website that was launched recently, and it's very parent-friendly. You can go on there and click on parent resources. You can click on professional resources. I think there's a medical, for medical providers, and it talks about every type of, from physical development to speech and language of children from birth to 5. So it kind of talks about what you should watch out for, what areas you need to get help and support with, but it's a very family-friendly website. And then the last slide is just my contact information with my phone and email. If you guys have any follow-up questions after the call ends tonight, you're welcome to shoot me an email or give me a call, and I'll try to respond as quickly as possible. So if it's okay with Melissa, if there's any questions, I'm happy to take questions or comments or thoughts that you guys had regarding gaining support along the journey with your child with hearing loss.
Thank you very much, Ann.
You're welcome.
If anybody has any questions, you're more than welcome to ask. everybody's so quiet this evening.
I know. I hope I didn't make them hang up.
Nah. I do have a question.
Sure.
How do you go about with a situation, say you have a family who, like the scenario that you gave earlier, Grandma and Grandpa watch them for so many hours a day, and Grandma doesn't really understand, or maybe she's embarrassed and says, oh, well, this child doesn't need them right now because she doesn't want to wear them. And maybe Mom has the feeling of, well, Grandma really doesn't want her to wear them because she's embarrassed that she has to wear them.
Yeah. And is it, I think it varies on the child's age. So I think, when Grandma's taking the child out in public, it's a very different thing than if the child's young and they're at home mostly during the day. But it is difficult, and I hear that a lot of times. I hear it from parents as well, that, it's difficult. I tell parents all the time that I think hearing loss is one of the most difficult diagnoses for a parent to receive, because until it's identified and treated, it's invisible. I mean, you can line 5 children up and you're not going to know who has hearing loss until you put hearing aids on the child that does. And so I think it becomes, because it then becomes such a visual, a visible disability, it becomes difficult. I think what I find most helpful is having the grandparent actually understand. There are some good resources out there with, and I'm going to blank on the name, but it's like where you can enter the child's hearing loss and it will play it back, a simulator, where it will play back to you, okay, this is how a child with normal hearing would hear this sentence, and this is, Susie's hearing loss, and when we play it, this is how Susie's going to hear it. So I think it really boils down to helping Grandma and Grandpa, whoever's watching the child, really understand what they're missing out on. I think it also warrants a frank conversation with the grandparents as far as what the parents' goals are, and are the grandparents willing to support them. If the parents want the child wearing the hearing aids, if they want them to develop speech and language or have access to sound, really getting the grandparents on board and understanding what that barrier is. Sometimes it can come down to, like you said, Grandma being embarrassed, and so really understanding that. And it can come down to having the difficult conversation with a grandparent saying, if you can't enforce this or you can't follow through on this, I need to seek out other child care, other arrangements for the child. And I think that's the most difficult one, because we, live in tough economic times, and that might not always be an option for some families to seek out different caregiving options. Is that
very good? That does. Also, I had a question of, do you run into the fact that maybe an extended family member brings about to the attention that the fact that the child has hearing loss, when, like, if you were just walking up to them in a grocery store, you wouldn't have known had Grandma or Aunt or whoever said, hey, she's got hearing loss, look at her hearing aids, and brings attention to the fact?
So kind of the opposite, you're saying?
Yes.
Where family members might be drawing to the attention, the parents might not want them to be pointing out, hey, this child has hearing loss.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think, again, like I said, it becomes a visible disability when you put hearing aids on the child. So, parents get really creative as far as, hairstyles or whatever, colors of the hearing aids. I tell parents oftentimes that it's a journey, and so the parents really have to come to the point of that acceptance, as mentioned in the Kubler-Ross stages, before the child can come to the acceptance, before the extended family members can. But sometimes the grandparents or aunts and uncles are going to embrace it, and, it takes a village a lot of times, and so if Grandma and Grandpa are going to embrace it before Mom and Dad can, that's okay, because somebody needs to be excited for the child and not be embarrassed about, the fact that the child needs hearing aids. I think it's interesting then what the parent's reaction or the primary caregiver's reaction is to the grandparent when they point out, oh, this child has hearing loss. Because it sounds like what you're talking about is having the hearing loss define the child instead of the child define themselves. Is that kind of what you're getting at, Melissa?
Yes.
Yeah. And so that can be difficult, and I think you can reframe it for the parent too. And again, I think it's hard because family relationships go deep. And so to be able to have a conversation with that person saying, hey, Mom, you know what? I'm glad that you're excited and you want to share with other people that, look at these cool purple hearing aids, but, I want to embrace, my son or daughter for their other strengths and abilities too, and not just point out, hey, look, Johnny has hearing loss and check this out, or announce it to everybody on the street corner.
Does anybody else have any questions or anything they would like to ask Ann?
This is Pauline. I don't know if it's necessarily a question, but in my situation, my in-laws had trouble with accepting it and almost never wanted to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And even though we've had this diagnosis now for almost 5 years, it's still the same way. So I found that I sort of had to change my thinking, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So basically, I just I don't really ignore it, but if something comes up, like if one of them says something and my daughter doesn't hear it, I just either gently remind them she can't hear you, tap her on their shoulder, or I'll repeat it for my daughter, and just ignore the fact that she's deaf, only because it seemed to cause a lot more tension, and I felt like I didn't want my daughter to have tension with her relatives. Felt like it was just better to just go about it as if it were my normal part of my day, and this is what we do when we see them. And I felt like I had to change my frame of reference with them and decrease my anger with it. So I don't know if it's the healthiest way to deal with it, but it's been smoother. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that you're going back to what I talked about with understanding the differences in coping. So, you've known, okay, my child has hearing loss and I've dealt with it for the past 5 years. My in-laws are still having a difficult time. They still, it's hard for them to think about or hard for them to face. So I can't really be in their face about it, and I have to maintain peace, but I also want it to be comfortable for my child when we're around them. But I think absolutely, and then also helping it sounds like you have a daughter, right?
Yes.
And she's still young, but getting her to a place where she can advocate for herself too, and that you're modeling that for her, I think is great. Saying, hey, Grandma and Grandpa, you need to tap her on the shoulder so she knows that she's talking to you. If she's not facing you, she might not hear you. So really, what you're doing there is modeling for your daughter how to be assertive for herself, and that it's okay to say, hey, I didn't hear you. Next time, can you tap me on my shoulder so I know that you're talking to me?
Thanks.
So hopefully that helps, but I think I agree with what you're doing. I think you're modeling for your daughter about, and every relationship is different, and so I think that you figured out what works with your in-laws, and you're modeling that for your daughter.
Yes, this is Anita. I would like to add on that, please.
Yes.
I think that's a great example as far as doing the advocating for our children and being able to model that to where they're able to advocate for themselves. Some children, too, are shy or have different types of personalities, and then you have family members who may be in denial or just not able to accept it. And the whole stages that go along with grief and loss, and you might see that they experience those stages too, the anger, the denial, and sometimes maybe it would be good to model a group session with the family, and you're able to show in a group setting what is required to include the child in the communication process. If everyone's able to see how the responses are with different types of modeling of communicating, and for the extended family, I think that would be a perfect example. And let's face it, it's just not easy. It's just not easy.
Yeah, and I think, every family is different, and so figuring out what works for your family. I agree. I think sometimes, if it's a child that's diagnosed when they're older and it's having to readjust or shift kind of those communication dynamics within a family, or if it's something from, a newborn baby that's diagnosed with hearing loss and it just becomes, as the child develops and grows and meets different milestones, you're shifting kind of what you might do with those cousins or other peers that are part of the family group. So I think modeling for the other family members as well. If there's siblings involved, I think the siblings can play a huge part in it too, as far as modeling for grandma and grandpa or aunts and uncles about, hey, you know, in order to communicate with my sister, to be able to talk to her, this is what I have to do. And sometimes it can even be unspoken, that you're just modeling it for grandma and grandpa, and, you know, you're tapping your daughter in the shoulder, you're turning her towards grandma and grandpa so that she knows that they're talking. And hopefully grandma and grandpa are going to take those nonverbal kind of communication tools or cues and kind of then say, oh, okay, that's right. You know, she didn't hear me. It's not that she's ignoring me. It's not that she doesn't want to pay attention to me, but really she did not hear what I was saying because she wasn't looking at me.
Hi, this is Jacqueline. I also wanted to make a comment too, sort of like what Pauline, what you shared about with your family and that. I guess one of the things that what I have done, you know, since my son was little was that I had to make an understanding within myself that no family member or friend could truly understand, you know, what I was going through or what our family was going through with raising our child. Because I guess, you know, we had so much compassion and so much of our life was being consumed about learning, you know, about hearing loss and how to help our child, that I felt that, geez, everybody, you know, that was involved in his life should share that same type of, you know, passion that I did. Mm-hmm. But I have learned to let that go and know that nobody is going to really truly understand that. And I guess I even put it in my own perspective, too, because we've all had family members that are going through or friends that are going through a situation, you know, a diagnosis or a disease. And, you know, you're going to be there to help them, support them, you know, do what you can, but you're not going to be as involved in it, you know. So I felt that that was how other family members dealt with what we were going through. They were helpful in that, but not really truly, you know, involved in it as much as we were. And I think that that helped us a lot to move forward and to accept our family member, to just be supportive and be positive, but, you know, and just treat him like any other child. But, yes, we, too, had to do a lot of those nonverbal cues, you know, that, you know, the grandparents may not realize he didn't hear it, you know, and we would just kind of, you know, tap them, move them, you know, things like that also.
Great, thank you.
This is Melissa. I just had one more thing to add. As far as extended family has gone, my family has been very gracious to do whatever Rosie has asked them to do. She's become a very good advocate for herself at the small age of 7. Sometimes I forget that she's only 7 years old. But the thing that helps the most is that she does advocate for herself. And like a few years ago, we had a split in our family, and I'm actually getting ready to get married. And so we have kind of a Brady Bunch going on. So we have my kids, his kids, and we all live together. And when we all moved in together, we all began taking sign language classes. And Rosie, after she was mainstreamed into regular school with just her interpreter, decided that she doesn't really want to sign anymore because she can talk faster than she can sign. So then we figured out we don't really need to take signing classes because she doesn't sign with us at home. She only talks with us at home, which has actually made it a little less stressful, but then it helps everybody to remember just their basic signs when, like, she's in a swimming pool or somewhere where she can't wear her hearing aids, so that they still have a way to communicate with her, and they do still remember that she is different, but she's just another kid just like everybody else.
That's great. So you have the basics and you have that support that you guys were seeking out to support Rosie until she said, hey, listen, I don't need this anymore. This is what how I want to be able to communicate with you guys, but that you still have that sign support when needed.
Yes.
Hi, it's Eliza. I actually have a kind of an opposite. What about what's the best way to go about trying to get the extended family to actually learn ASL so they can communicate with your child?
It's the opposite, absolutely.
So it's like it can be quite difficult. Of course, she can hear many things, but she needs the sign support, and they just do not give it at all.
And does she sign with them? Like, will she initiate sign with them to try to get
She will. When there's certain things that she can't say, or if she's saying it and they don't understand, she'll sign it, and, well, they still don't understand.
And then they all look to you to figure out what she's saying.
Yes, or if I'm not there, it's, yeah.
I think, I think that's absolutely difficult, too. I'd be interested to hear, Melissa, was it you who had said that you had gotten all the extended family members to take sign classes?
We had quite a few of our family take sign classes until she decided we didn't need to.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say to be direct and to see, can you bring those family members to a sign class with you? I don't know how you did it, Melissa. Was everybody just ready to jump on the bandwagon, or did you have any resistance to anybody not wanting to go to sign classes with you?
We had resistance at the beginning, like grandmas and grandpas were saying, well, my fingers don't move that way and I just can't do it, or I can't remember. But then when Rosie asked them to please go learn, they took it differently when it came from her rather than it coming from me.
Yeah.
I think it also helped that one of her teachers who taught her most of her sign language held the class in like a gymnasium, so it was a very laid-back class, and I know that's not available everywhere, but I think that's what helped most of my family go and try, because it wasn't like a classroom of this is what we're going to learn and this is what we're going to do. It was very laid back, and everybody had a chance to mingle and figure out what worked for them.
Kind of at their own pace.
Yes, this is Anita. I wanted to jump in and say something, please. So, being deaf myself, I remember my experiences with my family members, the extended family members, cousins, aunts, uncles, and I would sign to them, and they would look at me with this look that I knew that they were so confused because I could speak so well. They didn't feel like they needed to depend on any sign support or sign language, and I would say, yes, I could speak to you so that you can hear what I'm saying, but I can't hear what you're saying. And, my family, they have a Spanish dialect, even if they speak English fluently. The accent sometimes makes it almost impossible for me to read their lips. So I had to explain to them, the different accents, the different, dialects and everything made it almost impossible for me to understand them. And that's why I was requesting that they would use, some type of sign language, even if it was just gesturing and pointing. And it was interesting to see the responses. I had some family members that would try to exaggerate their mouth movements even more, and like someone had mentioned, like grandmother having arthritis and not able to move her fingers as well as she would like to. And I even had some family members that refused to sign, and they would just, speak with me and try to keep it on a one-on-one. So, being deaf myself, it's been very different with different extended family members and their responses.
Yeah, I think, and Eliza, as I think about what you said about your experience too, I wonder if your daughter can kind of become the teacher, because that's what sounds like it was really helpful with Melissa's situation. Every situation is different, but, can she be the teacher with you kind of as the guide or support? And so when she signs something, can you say, oh, that's the sign, she was signing this word, let me show you how to do it, or can we practice this word so next time she signs it to you, you understand it, and maybe make her the teacher to kind of get the family member excited about being able to understand what she's trying to communicate.
I can give that a try if I can get them past the denial after 5 years.
Right. Well, and that's the difficult thing is that everybody moves through those stages at such a different pace, and they can just be stuck in denial for a really long time. And no matter what we try as individuals or as parents to move them out of that, it's kind of, you know, we're trying to move a big boulder that's not going to go anywhere. So I think, you know, kind of it was Pauline that mentioned, you know, how do you work in this difficult situation? Because Grandma and Grandpa, too, sounded like a different sort of denial, that they didn't understand that they needed to get her child's attention first, of kind of using that situation and modeling it for your child to then be like, okay, well, they're not going to move past their denial, but I still have to figure out how I'm going to communicate and be an active participant in their life.
This is Melissa. Does anybody have anything else they would like to add or ask any more questions?
This is Anita. I have a question for Anne. Are you still on the line?
Yes, I am. This is Anne.
Hi there, Anne. Now, as an experienced senior social worker with parents who have children that have hearing loss, they come to see you and they express the different problems that they're having with their family. And do you speak to them about how to cope with different extended family members? So with your experience as a social worker, how does that apply to those situations with those parents who have the children with hearing losses?
Yeah, so I definitely do. You know, I'm available to parents and family members as they come into the audiology appointment. So oftentimes the audiologist will pull me in, you know, if the parents are expressing frustration or a difficult time, so kind of providing guidance and support. You know, I say this kind of with a grain of salt because we all have our own family dynamics. We all have, you know, histories in our family that go back long before, you know, our children were born and our children were diagnosed with hearing loss. So I think it's important to understand the dynamics within your own family. So with that being said, depending on the situation, I can certainly brainstorm with the family members. I can, like, just like we have now, like, you know, what worked for Pauline or Eliza, you know, can we apply those to different situations? Can we brainstorm about how we can make this situation better? When it's something that's more of a family dynamic issue that, you know, we've brainstormed and we've tried that and we're kind of feel like we're hitting our head against, you know, the wall, oftentimes I will refer families out for longer-term counseling or community support where they can get kind of ongoing therapy or counseling support from somebody outside of the hospital.
I see. Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Well, Anne, I would like to thank you for your presentation and for answering all of our questions this evening.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Not a problem. If anybody else has any questions or anything, you are more than welcome to ask. If not, then I think we're going to go ahead and end our call.
And if questions come up afterwards, feel free to email me. Like I said, my email is listed there on that last slide.
Okay, so I think I'm going to call that an end. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining the call this evening.
Thanks, Melissa. Have a good night.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.